Some men aren't broken by betrayal or defeat. They're undone by the things they say every day without even noticing. Not by what others do to them, but by the words they repeat to themselves like gospel. Words that sound confident, but slowly rot their discipline, kill their growth, and push away everyone who still believes in them. Here's the truth most won't tell you. What you say when no one's watching, that's who you really are. Your language isn't harmless. It's a map of your mind, and if that map is built on excuses, denial, and ego, it will lead you straight into a life of quiet failure. If you've ever heard yourself say something and instantly felt a crack of shame inside, this video will hit you like cold truth. We're not here to sugarcoat. We're going to confront 6 common phrases that slowly strip a man of his strength, and we'll show you what a Stoic man says instead. Because real change doesn't start with motivation. It starts with mastery over your mouth. Number 1, that's just how I am. There's something noble about a man who knows who he is. He walks with certainty. He speaks with weight. He doesn't shape-shift to fit the crowd, doesn't flinch when he's challenged. There's strength in identity when it's earned. But here's the trap. Not every line we draw is a boundary. Some are just fences we hide behind. One of the most quietly destructive phrases a man can repeat is, "That's just how I am." It sounds grounded, but it's not grounded in growth. It's anchored in fear. This phrase is often said with pride, but it's really a form of surrender. Not to values, not to principle, but to stagnation. It's what men say when they're tired of trying, when they've mistaken stillness for stability and resistance for integrity. I once worked with a man named Drew. He ran a small business, sharp thinker, respected by many. But every time his team brought up innovation, new strategies, or adapting to market changes, he'd shut it down with, "Look, that's not me. I've always done things this way." At first it looked like confidence, but over time his business plateaued. His best people left. His decisions grew defensive, not strategic. And eventually his company was outpaced by others who had less experience, but more courage to evolve. His downfall wasn't caused by some crisis. It was slow, quiet, predictable. Not from the outside in, but from the inside out. That's just how I am is not self-awareness. It's self-abandonment. It says, I've stopped listening. I've stopped learning. I've stopped becoming. And the Stoics warned us about this kind of spiritual decay. Seneca wrote, "As long as you live, keep learning how to live." Why? Because life never stops refining us unless we refuse to be shaped. Some men confuse experience with insight. They think just because they've seen a lot, they've understood a lot. But you can grow old without growing up. And the man who refuses to examine himself becomes a statue, hard, unmoving, eventually forgotten. But here's where the Stoic path offers a different way forward. A Stoic doesn't grip his old identity like it's sacred. He revisits it, challenges it, improves it day by day. He doesn't say, "That's just how I am." He asks himself, "Is this still who I choose to be?" Because identity for a Stoic isn't a wall to hide behind. It's a mirror to polish. Real strength isn't in refusing to change. It's in having the humility to outgrow who you were yesterday, without shame, without drama, and without delay. So if you've caught yourself using that phrase, you don't need to feel guilt. You need to feel urgency. Pause, reflect, then ask, what am I avoiding when I say this? And more importantly, who could I become if I stopped hiding behind it? Because comfort may feel like safety in the moment, but over time it erodes your edge, your fire, your becoming. And comfort is the enemy of every man who was born to rise. Number 2, real men don't talk about feelings. We admire the man who doesn't flinch, the one who takes hit after hit and keeps going. He doesn't break down, he doesn't open up, he doesn't ask for help. And we call that strength. But here's the question no one dares to ask. Is he strong or just emotionally silent? Because there's a fine line between self-control and emotional isolation, and many men have been taught to confuse the two. From locker rooms to living rooms, one phrase has echoed through generations. Real men don't talk about their feelings. But what has that silence cost us? Ask the woman who feels like a stranger in her own marriage. Ask the son who's desperate to connect with a father that only speaks in instructions, never emotions. Or ask Brian, a firefighter in his 50s I once met at a leadership retreat. Decorated, respected, rock solid. But behind closed doors, he couldn't sleep. He had built a life around keeping it together. Until one night, after a colleague's funeral, he said quietly, "I've carried too much for too long, but I don't even know how to let it go." That's the silent war, and thousands of men are losing it every day. Not because they're weak, but because they were raised to feel shame for simply being human. Emotions don't vanish when you ignore them. They ferment, they resurface, they mutate into anger, addiction, emotional distance, and worst of all, disconnection from yourself. And let's be clear, this isn't stoicism. This is avoidance dressed in a masculine disguise. Stoic philosophy never asked us to suppress what we feel. It asked us to understand it, to study it like we study an opponent, to remove its fangs, not its voice. Marcus Aurelius didn't write his journals because he was weak. He wrote them because he was wise enough to know that unspoken emotion has power, until it is named and met with reason. A real Stoic doesn't fear emotion. He fears being ruled by what he refuses to face. This doesn't mean you have to cry in a boardroom or bare your soul on social media. It means that in the quiet corners of your life, you have the courage to say, "I feel it, I see it, and I will not let it control me in the dark." You don't speak to be pitied. You speak to take ownership, to make sense of the chaos inside before it leaks into everything outside. Because the man who never speaks about his pain often becomes the man who passes it on. And the world doesn't need more men pretending they're made of stone. It needs men who know when to be still and when to speak with precision, presence, and truth. Number 3, it's not my fault. Some men walk through life with a quiet kind of power. They don't argue. They don't make excuses. When something falls apart, they don't rush to point fingers. They pause and ask, "What part of this is mine to fix?" That's not guilt. That's leadership over the self. Because the most dangerous lie a man can tell himself is that someone else is in charge of his destiny. Now let's talk about the sentence that kills that power. Slowly, silently. It's not my fault. Say it enough times and it becomes your story. A story where you're always the one being wronged, but never the one strong enough to make it right. I once knew a guy named Jeff, worked in tech, brilliant with numbers, but every job he took ended the same way. Bad boss, unfair expectations, wrong timing. His relationships, same pattern. She didn't support me. She was too emotional. It wasn't my fault. After a while, you start to realize it wasn't just the world failing Jeff. It was Jeff refusing to own his part in any of it. Here's the truth no one wants to admit. Blame feels good in the moment. It gives you a story. It gives you sympathy. But what it steals is agency. And without agency, there is no dignity. Only drift. The Stoics never saw blame as strength. They saw it as surrender. Because the second you believe everything happens to you, you've already lost the one thing that can change your life. Your response. But there's a better way. A sharper way. The Stoic way. Instead of saying it's not my fault, you say it's now my responsibility. You don't have to carry the blame for things you didn't cause, but you do have to carry the burden of shaping what comes next. Epictetus taught, it's not events that disturb us, but how we interpret and respond to them. And Marcus Aurelius put it even more clearly, you have power over your mind, not external events. That's the code of a Stoic. Not victimhood, not complaint, but composure, then correction. So when life hits hard, when someone wrongs you or something breaks that wasn't your doing, don't rush to defend your innocence. Defend your direction. Because the moment you shift from blame to ownership, you go from drifting to steering. And that shift, that's where transformation begins. Not in waiting for apologies, not in hoping the conditions change, but in choosing to lead, especially when no one else will. Let this be the turning point. Next time that phrase rises up, it's not my fault, don't swallow it. Don't say it. Say this instead, I didn't cause this, but I will carry it. Because the man who owns his response owns his future. Number 4, I deserve better. There's nothing wrong with knowing your value. In fact, self-respect is one of the pillars of a strong life. You should walk with a sense of inner worth. You should believe that you're capable of more. But here's the danger most men overlook. When I deserve better becomes a declaration without discipline. When it becomes a shield, not a standard, that's when it stops being confidence and quietly turns into entitlement. Most men don't say, I deserve better, after a moment of reflection. They say it after rejection, after being passed over, after facing discomfort they don't want to face again. It's a phrase that sounds like strength, but often hides something softer, something less noble: resentment, laziness, expectation without effort. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. When you demand something you haven't earned, you're not honoring your worth. You're escaping the work it takes to become worthy. The Stoics warned us against this kind of mindset. They didn't teach us to wait for recognition. They taught us to align with virtue, regardless of the outcome. Marcus Aurelius didn't say, make the world see your value. He said, be the good man. Period. No applause, no reward, just action. Entitlement poisons that. It convinces you that your disappointment is someone else's failure. It makes you believe that the world owes you for the effort you meant to give. But the Stoic sees things differently. He knows that what he deserves has nothing to do with his feelings and everything to do with his choices. The Stoic doesn't say, I deserve better. He says, I will be better. Because that shift from desire to discipline is what separates the man who complains from the man who commands respect in silence. Epictetus put it clearly. First say to yourself what you would be, then do what you must. No performance, no declaration, just quiet, unshakable alignment. And when frustration rises, when you feel overlooked, underappreciated, remember, what you build matters more than what you believe you're owed, because the world may never give you what you think you deserve, but it cannot ignore who you become when you stop demanding and start doing. Number 5. That's not my job. There's a quiet kind of strength in the man who acts without being asked. He doesn't wait for recognition or titles. He sees what needs doing, and he steps in. Not because it's written in a contract, but because his character is larger than his checklist. That's leadership. That's presence. That's the kind of man people count on, even in silence. But then there's the other kind, the man who draws a hard line around his responsibilities and never dares to step an inch beyond it. You'll hear him say, that's not my job. At first it might sound like professionalism, like setting healthy boundaries. But when that sentence becomes a pattern, what it really reveals is a shrinking sense of purpose. This is a man who stopped leading, stopped showing up with initiative, stopped being someone people rely on, and quietly started retreating into the comfort of just enough. The tragedy? He thinks he's protecting himself, but in reality he's making himself smaller, less useful, less needed, less remembered. Because over time, people don't argue with your limits, they simply adjust around them. And soon you're no longer part of the solution. You're just background noise, predictable, replaceable, unseen. But here's what a wiser man understands, that shrinking your presence doesn't protect you, it erodes you. Little by little, it teaches the world that you're unwilling to carry more. And in a world full of men doing the bare minimum, that's how greatness quietly disappears. So what's the alternative? The Stoic doesn't wait for instructions. He doesn't need a title to act. His measure isn't the boundaries of a job description. It's the weight of his own conscience. He leads, not because someone told him to, but because he refuses to let right action go undone. Marcus Aurelius said it best, your vocation, to be a good man. That means stepping forward when others hesitate, filling the gap when no one else notices, choosing responsibility, not because it's convenient, but because it's the mark of a man who lives by principle, not permission. So when that voice inside whispers, that's not my job, respond with a better question. What kind of man am I choosing to be right now? Because in the end, the men we remember aren't the ones who followed the rules, but the ones who rose quietly when it wasn't their job, but it was their moment. Number 6. It is what it is. There's a quiet strength in a man who stands calmly in front of chaos, not because he controls everything, but because he controls himself. He doesn't panic. He doesn't complain. He simply takes a breath, surveys the landscape, and begins to move, precisely, deliberately. That's the kind of composure we admire. It feels noble, grounded, stoic. But not every calm voice is rooted in wisdom. Sometimes it's just the sound of a man who's given up. At first glance, it is what it is seems like the mantra of this calm man. But listen closer, and you'll hear something different beneath the surface. It is what it is. It rolls off the tongue like acceptance, but in many cases it's a surrender in disguise. This phrase has become a modern shield, a way to hide from accountability without making noise. Not loud, not angry, just quietly resigned. The Stoics warned us against exactly this form of passivity, because resignation isn't peace, it's decay. It's the moment when a man no longer believes his actions matter, when he stops engaging with life because effort now feels pointless. This mindset, known in psychology as learned helplessness, isn't just emotional exhaustion, it's a fracture of the will. And like rust, it spreads silently, from your work to your relationships to the core of who you are. The tragedy? You start to mistake that stillness for strength. But it's not. It's stagnation wearing a mask. So what does a man do when he realizes the words meant to steady him have actually sedated him? He returns, not to reaction, but to intention. A Stoic doesn't pretend everything's fine. He doesn't sugarcoat failure, pain, or loss, but neither does he retreat behind vague phrases when life gets sharp. Instead, he asks, what can I still control in this moment? That question breaks the trance. It opens space between the event and the reaction, the very space where Stoic strength is born. Acceptance is part of it, but only half. The other half is agency. The Stoic path isn't passive, it's precise. It says, this is what happened. Now, here's what I will do. Because when a man overuses "it is what it is," he stops choosing. He becomes a spectator of his own story. But when he shifts to "here's how I will respond," he reclaims authorship, word by word, act by act. That's not denial, that's discipline. So the next time you hear that phrase rise inside you, don't silence it. Challenge it. Ask yourself, is this Stoic acceptance, or am I slowly fading behind my own indifference? Because true stillness doesn't numb you, it sharpens you. And the man who knows the difference, he doesn't just endure life, he shapes it. What you just heard weren't random bad habits. They were silent forces shaping the man you become. The good news? You're not bound by what you've said, only by what you refuse to change. A Stoic doesn't speak to impress. He speaks to clarify, to sharpen, to align with virtue. As Marcus Aurelius said, the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts, and words are where those colors begin. So speak like a man who's awake. Choose silence when it builds strength, and speech when it brings truth. If this message hit home, drop a comment. Which of these phrases have you caught yourself saying? And what do you want to see us explore next? Subscribe for more, because this isn't just a channel. It's training for the mind.